Question for both of you. In your negotiations with the South Koreans on the automobile, did you seek or were you offered any input from the American manufacturers who are located in Europe? Is there any effect on them? And for Troy, you were kind enough to write an op-ed for me, I guess a week or so ago, seems like a year, making some suggestions on what the American autos and auto parts people need to talk about. Has there been any sign of a coherent position by the alleged offended parties on the American auto and parts area, or is the silence continuing? I haven't heard anything, and it's driving me slightly crazy. Anyway, so two questions. Thank you.
Well, our main interlocutors throughout this negotiation has been ASEA, the European Association of Car Manufacturers. We have been working really very closely with them, particularly on issues relating to LTV, because we really relied on their expertise. Otherwise, it would have been extremely difficult to understand the complex Korean regulatory procedures. So we have really been working very, very closely with them. And as you know, U.S. manufacturers based in Europe, they are part of the ASEA, they are part of that industry association. So I'm sure they have been making their input through those discussions. We have not really tried to work with individual car manufacturers. We have been working with the association, which represents all manufacturers based in Europe, including, of course, U.S. and Japanese manufacturers. I think the Korean manufacturers are not yet represented in ASEA, but that is certainly U.S. and Japanese.
I don't want to take up a lot of time. I guess all I'll say is that basically, for those who haven't read the piece that I wrote for Chris, one of the things I talk about is expectation. And a lot of times when you hear autos talk about the U.S., the number that's thrown out is the comparison of 700,000 or 800,000 to 7,000. And sort of my point is one that Director Bercero brought up earlier, there's a significant difference in market sizes, and that when we ask the question of what our expectation should be, you're talking about maybe selling, perhaps if you had the same market share as Korea in the U.S. and vice versa, like the EU has right now in Korea, it's probably somewhere in the area of like 75 to 85,000 cars a year. Now, if that's what everyone's expecting, I think we can do well. If people are expecting to sell at 700, 800,000 cars a year, the Korean car market is about 1 million to 1.2 million. That's probably not a very realistic expectation. Mark.
Mr. Agent Bloomberg, I mentioned this whole idea of the equivalency on the auto standards. Is that working both ways? And if so, was there any pushback on from European regulators about this?
Well, all the commitments in the FTA apply to both sides. But it's important to understand that it's equivalence not towards European standards, but equivalence vis-a-vis UNECE standards, which are standards which have been set internationally by an international organization of which Korea is a party. The European Union has already, over a number of years, been following a policy of not having domestic standards which diverge from the UNECE standards. So from that point of view, we don't have to change our policy to comply with those commitments, because we already set that equivalence at this point in time. But the commitment applies to both sides.
In the back.
To go back to the issue of NTVs and automakers, do you have any sense of how satisfied the European automakers are in addressing new NTVs that you all have not yet covered in the agreement? How satisfied they are with the dispute settlement mechanisms that you've negotiated?
Well, you should ask them, but let's go step by step. First, as far as those technical regulations which are currently applied by Korea, I've had long discussions on this with the European car manufacturers, and I don't think that there is any technical regulation that the European car manufacturers have signaled to us is important from the point of view of market access, which is not being effectively addressed through our NTV sectorial agreements. There is, of course, a concern which the European car manufacturers have expressed several times about the risk of Korea developing in the future new regulations that would negate the market access benefits arising from this agreement. We have tried to deal with that issue through a number of disciplines in our sectorial annex on car and TV. We have, for instance, an all-encompassing commitment by which both sides committed not to modify or impair new regulatory measures, the commitments assumed under the sectorial annex on TV. Of course, without prejudice to the right to regulate, because neither we nor Korea are going to abandon the right to introduce regulations for legitimate safety or legitimate environmental protection reasons. But the language from our point of view is very strong and would provide us a good basis if there was going to be in the future a regulatory measure in Korea which is not properly justified to challenge this under a dispute settlement mechanism which is quite fast. Actually, I think it's slightly faster than the one that you actually have under products. Now, of course, we don't have in our agreement a snapback. That's an issue that you negotiated with Korea. I will not comment upon it. We don't have that in our agreement. We have instead the normal sanctions which apply in the case of a breach of commitment, which is the possibility of increasing tariffs across the board, but it doesn't need to be limited to the car sector. You can retaliate on any particular sector you wish to do so, up to the level of notification and impairment which is established in relation to that particular violation. We think that is effective. Quite frankly, one thing that we are quite convinced, if both the European Union and the United States ratify these agreements, both of these agreements include very strong commitments by the Korean government affecting the broad areas of regulatory power. I would find it very difficult to imagine that in those circumstances it would be simple to have measures being taken by Korea which try to negate those commitments. One thing is very clear is that we have given a very clear commitment towards our industry that we intend to be very vigilant and very active in the enforcement of all the provisions of this free trade agreement. And if at any point in time in the future there was going to be a regulatory measure being developed in Korea which we consider to be in relation to those commitments, we will certainly not hesitate to use all the instruments available under the FTA to respond to that. Now, we are of course following with a lot of attention to some development developments in Korea, and we are certainly in close contact with the Korean government to ensure that any such regulatory development does not negate the of the commitments that were assumed by Korea in this FTA. Yes.
Thank you. Jim Miller from Washington Trade Daily. On autos, how many more autos does the European industry expect to export over this year?
You should ask this question to BMW, Audi, Volkswagen, and I'm sure they will give you, no, seriously, a number of European producers have a significant expectation of increasing their sales